Hello, everyone. My name is Abigail Barbanel, and I've been a psychotherapist for 26 years. This is the 12th podcast in my series, Taking the Mystery Out of Therapy. And the topic of today is children and young people and how to raise and nurture them into full humanness. Before I start, I'd like to read to you a quote from Abraham Maslow. Um, this is the one. I'll put it on the screen. He wrote that in a book called The Father Riches of Human Nature from 1971, and that's what he says. All the evidence that we have indicates that in practically every human being, and certainly in almost every newborn baby, that there is an active will towards health and an impulse towards growth or towards the actualization of human potentialities. But at once, we are confronted with the very saddening realization that so few people make it. Only a small proportion of the human population gets to the point of identity, of selfhood, full humanness, self-actualization, etc. Even in a society like ours, he's talking about American society in his time, which is relatively one of the most fortunate on the face of the earth. This a great paradox. We have the impulse towards full development of humanness. Then why is it that it doesn't happen more often? What blocks it? So this is quite, I think, a striking quote, and it helps me start framing today's podcast. Because I also think I know the answer to Maslow's question. What blocks it? What stops people from, or the majority of people from developing to their full humanness? Full humanness is a term that I first encountered in Maslow's writing, so I think he created it. The answer to this question, I believe, will be covered in today's podcast through everything that I have to say. Maslow and Rogers were the developers of humanistic psychology, and what they pointed out to everyone, which should have been obvious, but they had to say it because it wasn't obvious, is that everything in nature, including human beings, has a need to develop to its potential, to become everything that it has the potential to become. So it's not, obviously everything in nature wants to survive, but survival isn't the goal. The goal is development, and survival is the condition. If you need to survive in order to develop. And what was really significant about humanistic psychology is the recognition that when development was not enabled, when it was compromised, it then results in psychological problems. Maslow and Rogers worked as psychologists in psychiatric wards and with quite unwell people who had loads of psychological difficulties. And very quickly they realized that there's a failure to develop the potential. They could see people's potential, and they could see that they were also not developing. In my book, Therapy Without a Therapist, I write this in the introduction. I'm going to read this so I don't mess it up. I'm saying this: farmers don't just throw seeds on the ground and hope for the best. They know how to give their crops the best conditions to develop to their full potential. If farmers operated their farms like we run societies, we would all starve. Maybe psychotherapy exists because we are starving psychologically and spiritually. Try to criticize that unsuccessful plant in your garden that is not doing so well. Hey there, raspberry, how dare you produce such poor and misshapen fruit? What's wrong with you? Get on with it. Life is what you make of it, mate. Try to tell the plant that it doesn't matter what you did, that you did not, sorry. Try to tell the plant that it doesn't matter that you didn't read the instructions on the packet of seeds and that you planted it in the wrong position with not enough light, water, or nutrients. Tell your plant it should do just fine because, well, why? Exactly. So we know this, every gardener, every farmer knows this about plants, that no matter what genetic potential is embedded into that seed or into that seedling that they're planting, they need to provide the conditions for that seedling or that plant to thrive. Without those conditions, it won't happen. And Carl Rogers was one of the first ones to kind of highlight that. And he has an example of potatoes in the basement that he noticed as a child who were striving to grow towards a bit of a source of light in the basement. He was from a farming family and doing their best to grow, but couldn't. And they were weedy and white and miserable looking compared with the potatoes that were planted in the fields and were lush and green. So even as a child, he noticed that. He noticed that everything in nature will try to fulfill its potential, but if not given the conditions, it won't happen. And whatever comes out is going to be a pale imitation or a twisted version of what it's supposed to be. And when he started to work as a psychologist, he realized that this very much applies to people. Now, you already know that I don't think it's therapy about therapy as fixing people, but as a process that restores people onto the path to optimal development, which is the path they would have been on if early in life and throughout they were given all the ingredients that they needed in order to develop to their full humanness. So again, therapy is not a process of fixing. It's a process that restores people to the path to optimal development. That is the path they would have been on if early in life and throughout they were given all the ingredients they needed for perfect development, to develop the full humanness. You also know from having heard my podcasts, I hope, and if you don't, I'm going to say it again, that I have a vision of a world that doesn't need therapists, that doesn't need people like me to do the job that we're doing. If children and young people are offered all the ingredients that they need to help them develop to their full humanness, they would not need therapy later in life. Some viewers who are parents might be triggered by this podcast into feeling a bit inadequate or fearful or shameful or even angry with me and kind of really feeling that I'm perhaps criticizing them. Some other viewers might be triggered into feelings of sadness or pain or anger when they think about their own childhood and adolescence and what they've had. Please remember that triggers are a source of information, and please validate everything you feel. Everything you're feeling is always valid, and it is there for a good reason. It is telling you something. I talk about triggers in the previous podcast, so you're welcome to watch that as well. So if you are triggered, please validate everything, because everything you feel is valid and it's a source of useful information for you. Children and young people and our human need to develop to our potential is the focus of this podcast. I would like to try and help all adults think about their role in relation to children and young people. This is not just for parents, this is for any adult who has any contact with children. It could be a relative, a grandparent, could be an uncle or aunt, it could be a neighbor, it could be a teacher, it could be a doctor, it could be anyone who has regular contact with children. Every encounter with children is an opportunity to support their growth, and this is what it should be, an opportunity to help them develop towards their potential. So what are children and young people? Well, children and young people are not a toy or an object of curiosity or something to play with or a thing. They are adults, humans in development. Children and young people are adult humans in development. This is what they are. Childhood is a very narrow window of opportunity for us to collect the ingredients that we need to become fully human, to become well developed. We then spend the rest of our lives as adults. So we spend much more of our life as grown adults than we are as children or young people. So it's a fairly narrow window of opportunity. There's not that many years to achieve that. And those years are very, very busy for children who are trying to develop, which is a natural thing to do. How well we do as adults, or the kind of problems we'll have, do not depend so much on our genetics. Our genetic blueprint gives us our potential for all kinds of things. How we actually turn out depends on our environment, or rather on how our genes interact with our environment. So it's not enough to say, oh, because my mother was depressed, I must have a genetic predisposition for depression. That's actually completely meaningless. You may or may not, but it's not important. What matters is what was given to you, what is the environment that you have encountered when you were a child and a young person. Children and young people typically do two things. They communicate and they learn, or at least they try to communicate and learn. This is what they do for the bulk of their time early in life. Playing is learning. Everything that children are doing is a form of learning. It's not just cute. Survival is obviously essential for development. We need to be alive to develop, but survival itself, like I said before, is not the goal of life. Survival is a means to an end. And without development, we have mental health problems without proper development. Children and young people instinctively always ask for what they need, but they don't necessarily have the language to say. They will communicate it through behavior, and it's up to adults to notice and be attuned to them and respond to it the right way. What makes humans special compared with other mammals on the planet is that our species traded instinct for development. In other words, we have an infinite capacity, a stupendous capacity to wire our brain, amazing neuroplasticity. And it's what makes us lifelong learners. It's why we can learn and change and grow and learn new things all through life. It's because we have neuroplasticity. When we're born, the human brain begins to wire absolutely everything in the environment. The human brain is the least differentiated organ in the body. What researchers mean by that is they say, well, a nose knows it's a nose, if you like, a finger knows it's a finger, a foot knows it's a foot. But the brain is there in potential, waiting to be wired from the outside, and it wires everything. So we're born and the brain waits for input from outside in order for us to become fully what we are. We don't have a lot of instincts like cats who, from a very young age, from kitten, within a week or two, they know how to do lots of things which are given to them by instinct, but they don't learn terribly well, definitely not as well as humans. We are the biggest learners on the planet, meaning that we have the most plastic brains, as far as we know, on the planet. But what makes us human, this ability to wire everything, is also what makes us more vulnerable to harm. If the environment around us is kind and loving and patient and attentive and safe, and we're allowed to develop warm and secure bonds with others, that's what's going to be wired in. If the environment, on the other hand, is harsh, critical, inattentive, cold, or just crazy and inconsistent, this is also going to be wired in. The area that covers this sort of information is called attachment theory, and I'm sure a lot of you will have heard about that. And attachment theory isn't some fancy invention of psychologists, but it's a description of lived reality. A theory is a good theory is a theory that describes reality in the best way possible. So researchers, early researchers in attachment theory noticed that when young reptiles were frightened, they would scuttle away to a safe place to hide. But when young mammals were frightened, they would run to an adult of their own species for protection. So we mammals need bond with the adult generation in order to stay safe and to develop. We need them for both these purposes. We need the adults to protect us from harm, and we need them to help us develop. The type of attachment that we're offered early in life will determine how we develop, and because it will contain the ingredients or not contain the ingredients we need in order to develop. Secure attachment will give us the foundation of safety and faith in relationships and in ourselves. Insecure attachment will wire the opposite into us. We will not feel safe in the world or in relationship, and we will not be particularly comfortable with ourselves either. We don't have faith in anything. All the three types known of secure attachment obviously lack the correct ingredients for children to develop to their full humanness, towards their potential. There are three insecure attachment styles. One of them is avoidant, ambivalent, and second one's ambivalent. The third one is disorganized. Avoidant is when a parent, or where basically the child can't bond with anybody, nobody's available to them. People are unavailable to bond with the child in a close way and relate to them properly and warmly and lovingly and in a validating way. There's just nobody there. So it could be because of physical absence. It could because the child went to boarding school too young, and even the best boarding school where children are treated really well, there is no one adult dedicated to each child. Every child has to share the adult resources with other children, and they don't have somebody dedicated to them to bond with, and children need that. So avoidant attachment is just not having that, not having the ability to bond at all. The adults are not available. There's none of that. Ambivalent attachment is when adults are sometimes available to the child, but sometimes unavailable to the child. And that's usually caused by the fact that the interaction with the child is usually to meet the adult needs, not the child's needs. So I know of people who the parent only related to them when the parent was drunk, for example, and they were actually kind of nicer, but it's dangerous. I've already talked about alcohol. That's terrible for children. But the parent was the nicest, if you like, when they were drinking. And so the child was a bit safer, kind of, and was shown a bit of attention, a bit of interest, maybe a bit of warmth. But when the parent wasn't drinking, they were not available. So ambivalent means it's sometimes there, it's sometimes not there. Disorganized attachment is the one that's guaranteed to produce post-traumatic stress or trauma. So all three of them are not good, and all three will produce symptoms of trauma. But disorganized is probably the worst, because in disorganized attachment, it's the very caregivers, the main caregivers, who are also the abusers, who abuse the child. Abuse of children, I will mention a bit later on what that actually means. When a child is abused by the very people that they look to for protection and for safety and for development, that is the biggest betrayal you can possibly have. And the child is trapped. There is nowhere to go. They can't escape because they're small and they need their parents. They're young and they can't survive alone, and they can't fight it either. They're completely overpowered. So disorganized attachment is when the caregivers are the problem for the child. We are born scared. We go from being 9 months in our mother's wombs where all of our needs are met without having to ask. It's just like heaven. Everything is just there and we float in there, and it's nice. For most babies before birth, it's not too bad. It's quite nice. But then 9 months later, nature pushes us out and we're thrown into the world helpless, completely helpless, without language, without the ability to do anything for ourselves, without speaking, and we're 100% dependent on our environment. 100%. A newborn baby without care will die. So what we find outside of the mother's body when we're born, when we're out the outside world, what we find outside when we're born will determine how we will be wired. So children are, as I said before, children and young people are adults in development, and the most dominant brain in them, the most dominant part of them in the start of all of us in the start of life, is the limbic system, because physical survival is a priority at that stage. If everything goes well, then at 15, we all begin to show evidence of the functionality of the prefrontal cortex, and we begin to show a bit more empathy. We become more self-aware, and we also become aware of the fact that other people are actually separate beings to us. We know that children need to feel like they are a part of their parents and their parents are a part of them in the beginning of life. That gives us the sense of safety because we cannot survive alone. So we need to feel like this with the adults around us. But when children begin to develop towards adolescence and their prefrontal cortex emerges more, they begin to develop more of an independent selfhood. So they begin to see that other people are not just resources to them. They are human beings in their own right. A child 5 years old cannot tolerate the experience of a mother or father being a separate person. They are their property. They're like the child's property. They're the child's resource, and that needs to happen. That's healthy. Um, and the parents need to make themselves available to the child in this way for their development and for their safety, the sense of safety. But when they grow older, the child, the elder child, a teenager, begins to tolerate the fact that mother and father have their own thoughts and their own feelings and their own reality, and they can do it more and more. And as we grow into adulthood, if everything goes well, we begin to see our parents not just as providers or resources for us, but as human beings, and we begin to appreciate them in this way, and also other people. Children tend to see every adult around them as a potential resource. They can't help it. It's necessary for them to feel that way. In the wrong environment, or in an environment that's less than nurturing at the start of life, self-awareness from the prefrontal cortex can be very, very distressing. That is because at that point, young people begin to actually realize that they're feeling stuff. It's not the fact that I've seen studies that suggest that the prefrontal cortex is actually the cause of psychological disturbance, and I think that that's completely nonsense. It's not the presence of the prefrontal cortex that's the problem. We need it to be proper human, proper adults, but it's the fact that it tells us what we're feeling. And if the child's already full of problems, if the child's already full of traumas, and then they emerge at age 15 to suddenly become aware of how they're feeling, that can be really disturbing. So early in life, children in bad environments would feel bad and would suffer, but they don't know they're suffering. They just are. Then there is a point where this switches on, and all of a sudden they realize it. And it's that realization that's so shocking. That's why it's so important that when people are emerging into adolescence, children are emerging into adolescence, they actually have had a good history, so that when they emerge into adolescence and they become self-aware, that it's not so traumatic for them. Children have no life experience, they are powerless and they're dependent. And so they look to adults for guidance, and teenagers are still doing it. Teenagers look to adults to see how to become an adult. If adults are going to nurture children and young people into full humanness, that means that they need to be constantly developing to their own full humanness as well. And they need to be committed to their own integration and growth so they can keep up, or in fact be a few steps ahead of their children, which is the desired state. Adults, you must have heard this before, but this is what I can maybe explain better what it means, that adults can only take children as far as they've come. A therapist can only take clients as far as the therapist has come. Teachers are the same. What does that mean? It means that whatever level of development the adults have arrived at in their own life, this is as far as they can take their children. That's why if the adult is committed to their own development, there is no limit to what they can offer their children, and they can accompany them right into adulthood in the best possible way. So the goal is to develop to our potential, not to be perfect. So anybody who thinks that what I'm saying might sound critical of parents, and it's probably going to get a bit worse in a few minutes. Actually, what we're looking at is growth to potential. We're not looking at perfection. Nobody's perfect. We're never there. We never arrive anywhere. We are on a path to developing more and more and more all the way through life until we die. Ideally, in an ideal world, people don't stop developing until they're in the grave, until they're dead. And so what's realistic isn't perfection, because that doesn't exist. That is an absurd concept. It's a limbic concept, really, but it's an absurd concept. It's not a mature concept. What's needed and what children need is commitment. Children don't need their parents to be perfect. They need to feel that the parent is committed to their own development and to the children's development. If the children feel that commitment is there, then everything's going to be okay. And even when parents make mistakes or falter here and there or forget to validate their feelings or act out a little bit, it's not going to be devastating because the whole structure is based on commitment to growth and development. And I know many parents, I mean, most of my clients are parents, and they say, look, I didn't respond well to my 12-year-old girl the other day. But then we had a chat afterwards, and I apologized to her, and I did validate her later, and I told her that I realized that I didn't respond to her properly, and then I changed it. And that is great because children learn that parents are not perfect, but are committed. And that's one of the things they're learning that takes them into adulthood. And when they're parents or they're responsible for children, that's wired in as well. Children need to be around adults who are themselves constantly growing. And that's one of the things I tell my clients. If my clients are changing and growing, which they are, then it's not just what they do with the child every minute or every day. It's not the only thing that matters. What matters is that they actually model, their brain models to the child's brain a model of movement, of malleability and change, not of stuckness. Anybody who's grown up with parents who seemed stuck, who never changed, who never really listened, who were rigid, the danger with that is that that rigidity is wired also into the child's brain. So I get clients who don't believe that it's possible to, they can change, but they don't believe it's possible because they've never seen a model of change. So it's not just what parents are doing. Parents' brains are actually blueprints for children's brains, and that includes the commitment and the ability to change. So that is in itself a very, very important thing. Because adult brains are the blueprints to children's brains, whatever is in the adult brain that is unprocessed or unintegrated is going to find its way into children's brains. So clients say to me, "Oh my God, that sounds scary." And I said, "Well, what do you think you're doing when you're raising a child? You're wiring everything into them. You're teaching them how to tie their shoelaces. You're teaching them how to put a spoon to their mouth and to eat. You're teaching them how to brush their teeth. You're teaching them millions of life skills all the time. What do you think you're doing? You're wiring their brain." The same works for all the psychological content that we need, all the psychological development that they need. Parents wire their children's brains. And if it's uncomfortable to hear this, then take your time, validate your feelings because they're limbic, and take a deep breath and tell yourself that it's your prefrontal cortex that is the parent, not the limbic. The limbic brain in adults can really raise a very good chimpanzee. We can be very good pet owners from the limbic brain, and it's not terribly difficult. But a limbic brain of an adult cannot raise a full human because a full human isn't just a limbic brain, it's two brains talking to each other together. As I show you in my this little child model, those two brains need to be connected. So that's a full human. A full human isn't just that. It doesn't work. So if parents parent their children predominantly from their own limbic brain, they're not helping them integrate, and the child will not be able to develop, at least not at that stage in life, towards their full humanness. I wanted to say something about adolescence too. So all childhood and adolescence, all of childhood and adolescence is a scary experience because children have no experience in life. They don't know much. The world is big and scary, and they depend entirely on the adults around them to help guide them into adulthood. Adolescence can be especially terrifying because adolescents feel instinctively, because of where their development where they are developmentally, that they're on the cusp of adulthood. They know they don't have much time left. The childhood is behind, they're no longer children, and there is an expectation that they will be out in society living their own life as adults. They are Adolescents are making the last ditch they have in order to acquire as much development as is possible for them. They will try to get as many of the ingredients that they need in order to develop, in order to be able to join the world of adults in an adequate way. The extent of suffering in adolescence, the fact that so many adolescents feel so lonely and so troubled and so scared and so anxious and lost, tells you not about them. it tells you about the fact that they weren't actually guided, that they're not being offered what they need in order to move into adulthood. Childhood is behind now. There's not much time left. They're panicking, basically. So when people look at the child who's anxious, sorry, an adolescent who's anxious, and they treat them like they're sick and like they need to get on with it, or think differently about their feelings, that is a horrific and unacceptable behaviorist approach to human beings that does not help them grow. No one should offer this kind of CBT approach to children or young people, as far as I'm concerned, to anybody, but especially to adolescents. It's incredibly harmful. The number of clients that I've had in 26 years who grew up believing that their problems were their problems, that there was something defective in them, it's just criminal. They were alone, they were lost, nobody helped them. They somehow managed, people who have good brains somehow managed to survive it, and then they come to therapy later in life. But why should they have to suffer like this? That adolescence should be a time where there's a great accomplishment, not of grades at school. That could be a part of it, but it's not about grades. It's not about achieving stuff that helps them just to survive in the world, but it's really an accelerated time for development and a very narrow window of opportunity. So there's a lot of panic in adolescents who are not getting what they need. As I said earlier, psychological suffering is primarily a result of failure to grow towards a human potential. When the ingredients are still not available there in adolescence, it can feel like this is time's up. I've got no more time. So it's no wonder that so many children, so many young people arrive at adolescence collapsing into complete anxiety. As soon as school is finished, and the structure that school provides with all the, the timetables and the structure and something to belong to, that you're part of something, that good or bad, it's a structure that you attach to. As soon as that disappears and the demands on young people become greater, so now they have to function in the world without being guided every step of the way, they can become extremely anxious and fearful. When kids go at 18 to university, and despite the fact that they're super intelligent and capable, they collapse with anxiety and they can't function. It's not because there's something wrong with them. It's because they're not developed enough to be able to do that. And that is because their environment did not provide them with the right ingredients for that, to be able to function as appropriate for that age group. So the more the demands increase as we grow older, the worse it gets. The worst time, I think, for people, after adolescence is 20s. I don't think I would ever go back to my 20s, even if by magic, somebody offered me a lot of money and said, if I give you a lot of money, you can go back. I would never go back because it was such a difficult time. I was not equipped at all for adult life, and yet the demands of life, suddenly you have to work, you have to earn money, you have to pay rent, people expect you to be independent, and a lot of young people are completely ill-equipped to do that. If there is anxiety like that in an adolescent or a young person, it's actually a signal that those ingredients are missing, and what they really need is for people to step in and provide them, even at that stage, because their brain is still malleable. We don't get a completely developed adult brain, if you like, until 25. So there's still a window of opportunity for from late adolescence right up to there for adults to wire kids from outside in. And when I work with young clients, it's quite rare to get young clients in therapy. And the only reason I get young people in therapy sometimes is because for whatever reason, they don't get what they need from the adults in their lives, or not enough, or something's missing. So I don't work as a therapist in the sense that I'm not fixing anybody, but I'm actually helping them to develop. And at that stage, I think that I still have some capacity to wire them from the outside. So if I validate their emotions, their brain responds by wiring, whereas when they're much older than that, they have to do it themselves. So I still teach my young clients to do that, to validate their own emotions, but I know that they also have a direct impact on them. So that's quite gratifying because they achieve enormous amount of growth, even in a short amount of therapy. And most young people don't come to therapy regularly. They don't actually need it. I fulfill something that the adult world was supposed to fulfill for them. So I just fill in that gap for them. Remember also that good integration is what we actually need to be fully human. That's the answer to Maslow. Why doesn't full humanness happen? Because people are not integrated enough, because they're not getting what they need in order to become integrated. And if people don't have enough integration, by the time they reach adulthood, they will find life very difficult and suffer from anxiety. And I've spoken about this in previous podcasts. Most people in the world are taught how to survive, but are not necessarily given the ingredients, given the integration from outside to be able to grow. Or rather, they were not wired for integration because the adult generation didn't know how to do that. So I wanna mention a little bit something about abuse, and say what abuse really is. So abuse always happens. All abuse, in all types of abuse, and at any stage of life, happens always, or can only happen, in a situation where there is an imbalance of power. So an abuser has to be more powerful than the victim. If the victim has enough power, they won't be a victim. They'll be able to get away, or they'll be able to fight back, and they can't be exploited. So abuse is an experience which happens in the context of imbalance of power, where the more powerful person or group or system exploits that person, the victim. The victim is now not seen as a human being, but as a resource for the purpose of somebody else. So that's where abuse is. So abuse can be in many different ways, but every time a person who has no ability to resist or to choose something else is used for the benefit of somebody else's needs, that is abusive. It is not abusive if the person has complete and utter choice to do that, to provide a service to somebody else, and they are doing it completely freely, and they get compensated for it in some way, then there's no problem. A company is not abusive to employees if the employees are well paid for what they do and are respected and given a decent environment and appreciation for what they do. But if the company that employs the people in a particular town is the only employer, and they are the ones who have the ability to call all the shots, so they can pay whatever salary they want, they can keep people in whatever conditions they want, and people cannot fight back because they don't have any power. So that's abusive. That's exploitation and abuse. Of course, children and young people are vulnerable by definition, which means that they are pretty powerless to protect and defend themselves, and that's why we need to be particularly vigilant about protecting them. Trauma, which is likely to be the result of abuse, is the biggest obstacle to development, and it's also a betrayal of our humanity. And it takes a great deal of time, and I have spoken about trauma. It can take a great deal of time and effort to recover from trauma later in life. Of course, it's possible, but why should people have to suffer, and why should they have to spend so many years integrating or healing stuff that shouldn't have been there in the first place? They should never have been treated that way. I think, I'm going to get a bit philosophical here, but I think our attitude to children and young people reveals a great deal about our relationship, or humanity's relationship with itself, and it's not great. Look at the world. The most consistent pattern since recorded history is a pattern of self-destruction. We are a self-destructive species. Yes, of course, there are pockets of kindness and goodness. And I mean, I know loads of amazing people, and there's lots of good stuff being done in the world. But what I'm looking at is what's dominating, and impacting on everybody's life. And why I have a job are adverse conditions, are bad conditions that are hurting people. So I think, and it's very clear to me, that if we want to be different as a society, as a species, we really need to think about how we help children and young people to grow to their potential, because these are the adults. These are adults in development. They are the next group of people who are going to be in the world. So how do we help children and young people develop to their potential? Well, I think you already know the answer to that because I've spoken about this in the first 4 podcasts where I explained what therapy really is. But I'll just repeat a little bit of that with a bit more focus on children and young people. So, apart from safety and obvious warmth and love and flexibility and acceptance and all of that that children need validation. They need to be seen. Their inner experience needs to be recognized by the adults around them, or as Dan Siegel says really beautifully, they need to feel felt. We all need to feel felt. When a child expresses feelings, what is actually happening is their limbic brain is reacting to something in their environment. And remember, they're scared, they have no life experience, they don't know what is, if you like, what's worth worrying about and what's not so worth worrying about. We have experience, so we know that something small is not that big a deal and something bigger, more important, is more worth worrying about. The children don't have experience. They look to adults to help them wire that kind of scale of what's really worth worrying about. And so um, they need to know, their limbic brain needs to know that their concerns, that the feelings that they bring, which are information from the limbic system about what's going on in the child's environment, they need to know that that information goes straight into the adult's prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that allows us to see other people, or as Ziegel says again, also helps us make them feel felt, but also helps us make, if you like, a mental map of somebody else's inner reality. That's the part of the brain that gives us that ability. Children need to experience that. They need to experience the sense that their concerns, their worries, their fears have gone into the adult brain, and that adult who's entrusted with their protection and development is going to act for their benefit and will help them. So when I say validate feelings, this isn't some kind of self-indulgence. This is a fundamental, profound, most important function that a parent can fulfill, except keeping the children alive and safe and well and clean. For development, the child needs to feel that their concerns have been received and that the adult will act on them appropriately. How an adult lets a child know that they've seen them is by validating them. So validation is not just a fancy word. All it means is the adult is saying, listen, I can see that you're feeling very, very scared. It's okay to feel scared. So when we validate and we say it's okay to feel something, it's our message to the child or the young person that we really, really heard that feeling that they provide, which, and feelings are information. So automatically, the moment you show a child by validation that you have received the information, they relax a bit. So if a child comes home scared because their friends didn't play with them at school today, in their little brain, friends not playing with them and not choosing them for the basketball team, they're going to die. Their limbic brain tells them they're going to die. So the parent can't dismiss that. And the parent should not ever, no adult, to say, oh, come on, don't worry about it. They didn't play with you today. They might play with you tomorrow. This is a completely inadequate way to respond to children's feelings. Completely inadequate. The way to respond is to say, wow, you seem very disappointed or hurt or sad. Maybe you're a bit scared. It's okay to feel the way you do. I'm really sorry this happened to you. Let's sit together. I'll look after you. Everything's going to be okay. So we soothe, we validate, we soothe, we reassure. This is what we do for children. We validate, we soothe, we reassure. Validation is to say to the child, it's okay to feel the way you do. And if you know what the feeling is, you can name it. If you don't know what the feeling is, you don't have to name it. You can just say it's okay to feel like this. The soothing is to tell the child that they're not alone. I'm here with you. Everything's going to be okay. Sorry, I'm here with you. And the third one is the reassurance. You say, look, it's hard now, but I'm with you. and everything's going to turn out all right. And if the child has a problem that's much bigger than that, something much more profoundly serious, like abuse or bullying or something that they encounter outside the family or in the family, the parent's job is to do something about it, to make sure the child is safe and to stop the abuse. It cannot continue to happen. So I am absolutely shuddered to hear every day in my work how services are treating children, especially child and adolescent mental health services, who are telling the child that they're thinking wrong about their feelings, and instead of actually listening to them and validating them. And of course, that's not only not helpful, that makes the child feel even more alone and even more frightened. So and that's not just existential fear, it's also the fact that the child can sense that they're not developing properly. They don't know it. They won't know to say this to you. They won't know to say to you, I need you to validate me to help me develop. But their fears will be also about not just about survival or about whatever it is that they're afraid of, but also the fact that they're not developing properly. They're not being equipped to grow into adult life properly, and into developing the potential embedded in them. It's not all right for a parent to say to a child, I love you, I love you, I love you. But then every time the child comes back with feelings that tell them something stupid, like, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, or that's not important, or dismissing them or ignoring them. I have a list in Therapy Without a Therapist, and also in my book on anxiety. There is a table with a list of examples of how not to handle children's feelings. So please do look at that. It's in Therapy Without a Therapist, and it's also in the anxiety book. And it's very clear there. And I also leave room at the end of the table for people to put their own examples from their own experience of how not to handle feelings. But all of the examples I'm giving are the opposite of validation. It's children's feelings are not received, not heard, and not acted upon properly. Now, validating feelings in children and adult and young people does not mean that you accept every behavior. Most children, because they develop this about age that becomes more pronounced at age 15, they don't actually have morality or self-regulation or empathy until about that age, when that starts to show. So they do need rules and boundaries and guidance, but that does not contradict validating their emotions. The two things exist at the same time. They need both. So children don't know why it's not okay to poke their baby brother's eye with a stick because they don't like the brother, because they're jealous of them. They need to be told it's okay for you to be jealous of your brother. Of course, you're going to be angry, or of course, you're going to be jealous. Of course, you're going to be scared that maybe we don't love you as much. So it's okay for you to feel everything, but you are never, ever to hurt your brother. So guidelines and rules and boundaries absolutely have to be there to protect children from themselves and also from harm that they can do to others, because they don't have yet the natural instinct to regulate themselves, to stop themselves from it. So they need rules. So validation doesn't mean accepting behavior. It's not one or the other. You validate the feelings, and you might need to put some boundaries around behavior and make family rules that say, we don't do this. You are not to do that. However, whatever you feel, you come to me and talk to me about it, and I will always tell you it's okay to feel it, and I will sit with you when you do. One of the reasons that children, especially in adolescence, might start to have problems is that they perceive something that we call hypocrisy. The adults have rules for the children and boundaries that might be actually quite good, but the adults themselves don't obey them. They don't live by those rules. So children will feel that it's inconsistent, and they will feel like the adults, they can't really trust the adults, because why are you not following the same rule that you're telling me? So for example, an adult parent will tell the child that they're not allowed to yell at their brothers and sisters or their friends. But then the parent yells at the child, or the parents yell at each other. So you can see the problem here. The child is told it's not appropriate for you to express anger towards your brother or sister by yelling at them. If you're angry, come to me and I'll validate you. But then the parents themselves yell at each other or yell at the children. It doesn't work like that. So you also have to be consistent and follow the rules that you're expecting the child to follow. The children who grow up with inconsistency or with a sense of hypocrisy will learn not to trust the adults, which in itself will interfere with their development. So that's really, really not helpful. And they shouldn't, that shouldn't happen. There needs to be consistency there. You don't say to a child, do not be violent, and then beat them up, or the parent beat up each other. It's not okay. Um, Adults can't hide, even with the best of intentions, adults can never hide their inner reality, their inner world from their children. Children are like this with your brain. So they feel everything you feel. Whatever you put on your face, your child's going to feel whatever it is you feel. Dan Siegel wrote a book a long time ago called Parenting from the Inside Out. Let me share just a cover with you. It's a really, really amazing book, which was quite revolutionary when it came out because it told parents that if they want to parent properly, they have to sort themselves out, basically. I don't know how the cover says it sold over 150,000 copies, so 150,000 people bought it. But how many people are following it, I don't know. I think a lot of people found it very threatening because Dan Siegel says, effectively, everything that's not integrated in you is going to end up in your child's brain. So that's why I said in the trauma podcast that even with the best of intentions, parents who have unresolved trauma are going to wire trauma into their children's brains. It's inevitable. Whatever is unintegrated in the parent's brain will end up in the children's brains. When people integrate horizontally in therapy, as adults, after growing up with parents who put their own stuff into their heads, when people integrate horizontally, they begin to work out what is mine, what is theirs, and what is their parents' stuff. But people shouldn't have to wait until adulthood to do that. As I said, I want to do myself out of a job. Therapists shouldn't have a job in an informed adult brain, adult world where we actually know everything I'm telling you, I didn't make up. It's all completely known, and it's not even new stuff. Now, parents ask me, well, what do I do if I feel stuff? What should I tell my children everything about what I feel? Um, what do I do? And the answer is no, of course not. It's not appropriate for you to tell everything that you feel to your children. It's dangerous. It's bad that they can't handle that. So what I do tell people is that children need to know that adults are there for them, that adults can always look after them. So if a parent looks distressed, the child gets worried. When children are small, it's not about empathy. It's not, they don't empathize with the parent in an adult way. It's more about worry. They worry for the adult. If the mother is upset or the father is upset, they think they can't take care of them. So children just want parents to be okay so that they can be fit to look after them. It's how it is in childhood and adolescence. So I recommend to people that they can say to a child, to some degree, age appropriate, what they feel, but they always have to be to accompany that with the message that I feel. They give you an example. So a parent that is sad or grieving because let's say a friend passed away and they're very sad. The children need to know that the adult is actually okay with feeling that way, so and that they can still look after them. So a well integrating parent who is developing and is well self-regulating and self-organizing will tell themselves that it's okay to feel grief and sadness, and they will know what to do and how to look after themselves when they feel it. And they will be able to say to the child, yes, I'm grieving and I'm very sad and I miss my friend, and I'm really quite it's very strange for me that they're no longer there. Oh. And I am perfectly okay with my feelings. I feel them and I'm okay with them, and I can still look after you and love you and take care of you and validate you without any problem at all. And that's what the kids need to hear. And you can do that from very early childhood. When the child is older, when they're teenagers and they understand things, you can talk to them in a bit more depth about it. But at the end of the day, they need to know that the adults know how to look after themselves. They do not need to look after the adults' feelings. And if children don't get that feeling that the adult is able to look after their own feelings, they will step into a carer role. And it's not because they feel empathy, it's because they want the parent to be okay. But instead of um, investing in their own development, which is what they need to do, they suddenly their focus becomes the parent. So there's loads of clients I've worked with, and I was actually myself growing up, because the way I grew up, I was like that. Uh, the parents' needs were more important than the children's, and that's incredibly harmful. So one of the most harmful thing to children is when adults use their children to meet their own emotional needs. It is an unbearable burden on a child and a teenager to feel like they have to look after their parents' emotions. It's unacceptable, and it's effectively abusive because it's really using the child. And remember that adult, or I'm going to say that now, relationship between adults and children is one-way traffic. Adults meet their needs, not the other way around. In every interaction that's not gone so well, adults need to do something that can help them get out of that situation and resolve it, which is to ask themselves whose needs were being met in that situation. So when we do supervision in therapy, it's a common question to ask when something goes wrong between a client and the therapist, and something's not quite right, and the therapist brings that to supervision. We listen to what happened, and then we ask the therapist sometimes whose needs were being met here. And then people go, oh, the therapy, if a therapist is well committed to their own growth and are developing, they say, oh God, yeah, it was that moment, it was actually my need. Therapists can also, by accident, meet their own needs to their clients. For example, the client has to develop really, really fast and grow and improve. Otherwise, the therapist feels incompetent. So unconsciously, therapists can put their own need to feel competent on their client and rush them when, in fact, that's completely inappropriate. The speed of development is to do with the client's own process, not the therapist. So this is an example where therapists would have an expectation that clients meet their own needs. And as soon as that happens, it interferes with the client's development. So therapists need to be on top of that. And the same principle exists for parents. Parents need to understand or try to be as aware as possible in every interaction with the child whose needs are being met here. When I'm playing with my child, is it about them or is it about me? Now, it's not wrong for you to have needs and to meet them, but as much as possible, they should not be met by the child. One of my lovely Gestalt teachers many, many years ago used to say that relationships between adults and children should be regulated by the child's needs, not by the adult's needs. Adults are required to meet their needs with their peers in adult groups, in adult relationships, not through their children. Most adults, even the most abusive, know how to keep their children alive. But not everyone knows how to help the children develop to their potential. The fact that there's such a rise in child and adolescent mental health problems, especially things like anxiety, tells you that there's something wrong with the adult environment, not with the children. So it's a failure of the adult world, not a failure of the child or the child's brain. And that's the way it should be treated. Adults have a responsibility to ensure the children at all times are given as much as possible everything that they need for integration, for growth and development. As I mentioned in my podcast on personality disorder, there is a small number of children who are born without the ability to develop a fully functional brain. And no matter what their environment does to them, that may never change. So that's quite unfortunate. But the vast majority of people have perfectly healthy brains. And children, for example, with neurodiversity, like autism, also need to be validated so they can grow to their own potential. And I work with a lot of people with autism, and I'm also a consultant to managers in the learning disability sector. And we know for a fact that when people with learning disabilities have their emotions validated, they also grow. So somebody with autism will not lose the autistic challenges. For example, if they have sensitive hearing, or they feel taste really strangely, or they're not so good at social cues or things like that, they lose the fear, they lose the anxiety about it, they lose the panic about it, because they're able to self-regulate, they're able to validate their feelings, and they are completely grounded. They can they can be alive with those challenges, but not panic about them. So they actually end up with the same experience of peaceful existence and growth and development as clients who are neurotypical who do not have autism. So children with autism, even on the extreme end of it, need to have their feelings validated. Children who do not feel that their feelings are validated and heard will escalate their behavior. So if your child's already escalated, you know that things have gone too far and we really need to catch them and validate them. Now, it's only in the past 60 years or so, I'm 61 on Wednesday. So it's only about my lifetime that there's been reliable contraception for women, and women could now choose to not have babies. Previously, sex led to children, and whether or not people wanted children, they had them. They didn't have a choice. But now we can choose. So I think people need to think very, very carefully why they're having children and whether they actually have enough development to help children develop so that they can offer them anything they need to grow to their potential. Children are not a lifestyle option. They are not a way for parents to feel, men or women to feel acceptable in society. It's not a rite of passage. I really shudder when I hear politicians talk about people having to have children because it's a future economic resource or it's a solution for a problem with an aging population. Children are not an object. And children are adults in development. So if they're raised as an object, they grow up into adults who think and behave like they're an object. And no adult who is objectified, no adult who experiences themselves as a thing instead of a human being is going to be well psychologically. Children are not an object, and they should not be born with a job or a task to fulfill or a purpose other than their own development. If children are brought up to develop properly, they will become healthy in mind and body, and they will make an incredibly useful contribution and powerful contribution to their own society. But people catch the wrong end of the stick. Only healthy growing humans can contribute to a healthy and robust world. It is not okay to have children because it makes women or men more respectable members of society, or because people feel that that's what's expected of them, or because they're lonely, or because they want a family, or because they want somebody to love them. These are not good reasons to have children. I'm so sorry to say this, but this is the case. When I was a small child, my father always used to tell me that to have children is like buying shares, because after a while they begin to give you dividends. So children are shares that give you dividends. He used to say this to us, to me and my brother, all the time when we were small. He clearly believed that having children was for his benefit. Now, you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear that he abused me from very early childhood for quite a few years until I was old enough to avoid him and to stay away from him. My father had a personality disorder, and only a parent with a personality disorder would really believe that their children are a resource for them. But even many adults who do not have a personality disorder can unintentionally end up trying to meet their needs through their children. They don't know that they're doing it. They don't necessarily mean to, but they might do that. How the prompt for them to change that and to become aware is to notice how their children are behaving. If the children are angry with them, if the children are developing anxiety and problems, the parent they need to wonder if there's something that they're doing, if they're trying to meet their emotional needs to their children, or they are themselves not sufficiently developed to help the child to grow. Either way, this kind of situation is what brings clients to therapy later in life. Parents wasn't able to help them. Some parents met their emotional needs to their children unintentionally, but they still did that. And other parents had personality disorders and they inflicted massive harm on their children because they treated them like a resource. The only reason I believe in my ideal universe, and I'm an idealist, the only reason to have children is because parenting is the person's vocation. There are adults whose purpose in life is to help children and young people to develop the full humanness. Of course, you don't need to have your own children for that. You can do this in other capacities. And Adults who have that vocation will also typically be passionate about that, about potential, about helping the child develop. This is what they want to do. I am very fortunate to meet many people like that as clients in my work. If children already have problems, they need to be heard properly so that we can listen to what it is that's going on for them. Short of outright abuse, there is nothing more damaging and there is no bigger betrayal than telling a child or an adolescent who's suffering to just get on with it. If professionals, experts have told you to do that with your child, don't listen to them. Listen to your own instincts as a parent and seek the help and support of someone who understands what humans need for healthy development. Seek the help of somebody who can help you guide your child to healthy development, not somebody who tells you to tell the child to get on with it. This is a betrayal, and this is absolutely going to lead to problems. And that's not because I have a crystal ball, it's pretty predictable. Children communicate feelings in many ways, always in the hope that someone would see and validate them. Their brain instinctively knows that this is what they need to develop properly. They need to be seen and validated. When they don't get it, it's painful and frightening, and their problems will get worse, not better, because they will try to escalate to finally to get heard. So they'll get very angry or act out in some other way or become really depressed and unwell. But one way or the other, something that should have been a feeling that should have been caught when it was small is now escalating. Children shouldn't have to escalate their behavior or mental state in order to try and to be seen. It is harmful to them. They need to be seen and heard and validated all the time, so there is no delay in their development. Remember, development is a very narrow time. It's a very narrow time frame. Most of the life we spend as adults. Now, like all creatures, nature, through our limbic system, wants us to have as many children as possible for the survival of our species. If we want to stay at the level of survivalism, we can. But the world is a mess precisely because we're driven by survivalism instead of our need to grow to our potential. I'm yet to see a school that is really focused on what I'm talking about, instead of like shoving knowledge into children's head and preparing them to be good economic units in the world. In other words, to survive in the world. Survivalism is not life. Growth is life. Survivalism should be a given to everyone, anywhere in the world. Survival, safety, belonging, all of the bottom bits of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, these things that he mentions in the hierarchy of needs that some of you might have seen, all of these needs need to be given, especially the basic ones. Safety, the two basic levels, needs to absolutely be provided to everybody on the planet, because what really happens if these things are not provided, the self-actualization, the point of fulfillment, becomes really, really difficult. Now, the need for that is just as basic as the need for food, warmth, water, and rest. People have often misunderstood this hierarchy of needs that Maslow had. Self-actualization, or the need to grow to our potential, is just as fundamental as this. But if this is not provided, then all the effort will go to meet those needs, because security, safety is not guaranteed. Then, growth will be put on hold until the survival needs are met. That should never happen to anybody. We need to create a world that is safe and secure for everyone, where everybody has everything they need at the basic level, where they feel that they belong and they're loved and they're needed and they help to develop. And the self-actualization will just be the outcome of it. It won't be something to think about in particular. It will simply be the outcome of having those things in life. So I think we could transform the world overnight if everyone was given what they need in order to grow to their full potential. The more realistic path, I recognize is not going to happen overnight. The more realistic path is to ensure that every human being that is born is seen for what they are, an adult in development, and an adult that can develop towards their full potential and needs the ingredients for that. One generation, only one generation of parents now fully dedicated to their own development and their children's can be the start of a complete and much needed transformation for humanity. So you see that I tie in the topic of, if you like, parenting of children and adolescent development to our entire well-being as a species, because children are just waiting to be adults. They're not children forever. And I hope that I made this a bit very clear. Please do validate children's feelings all the time. Make sure you are growing and are committed to your own growth. All the information for that is available in the beginning, in the first 4 podcasts and along the way, and also in my book Therapy Without a Therapist, and the book on trauma and the book on anxiety also provide information that could be useful for you, to you for that, if you are looking after children. And even if you're not looking after children, if you bump into a young person or a child, you're automatically in a role of guide, in a role of somebody who helps them develop. This is your role. So even if I bump into somebody, a teenager working in a supermarket, even in that moment when I meet them with this little interaction, I'm aware that I have a responsibility for their growth. So in a small way, I would try to contribute to that. If they say something, I will validate it. I hope this makes sense. And if not, well, I hope it does. But even if not, and even if you have questions or comments, please write to me to podcasts@fullyhuman.co.uk. That's podcasts@fullyhuman.co.uk. I will try as I go to put some of the things I show you, the resources I show you, to put them on the website so that you can download them from my resources, public and client resources page on my website, which is at fullyhuman.co.uk. That's fullyhuman.co.uk. Thank you so much for your time. I know this has been a very long one. It's over an hour, but it was very important for me to say everything that I wanted to say. I really didn't I didn't want to leave anything out because it's such an important topic. So take care of yourself, integrate and grow, and hopefully you can join me for the next podcast. Thank you.